Some questions in the Imperium are spoken only in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, carried no louder than a dying ember's glow. They are not written in any sanctioned data slate, nor whispered through any vox grill worth flaying for treason. Yet they travel all the same, across starless holds, through the dust-choked arteries of half-broken manufactura, into the dreams of soldiers who have seen too much. I first heard the question long before I dared to understand it. It came the night our regiment held the line against a tide that should have drowned us, the air vibrating with the shrieks of demonic claws tearing reality open. For a moment, just a moment, I felt something push back. Not salvation, not mercy, not the Emperor's radiant truth. Something else. Something newborn. Something that trembled between promise and extinction. As if it waited to know whether mankind wished it to rise or wished it to die. And in the fractured silence that followed, I found myself wondering what it would mean if a new god truly stirred in the warp, born not from our sins, but from something we had forgotten we still carried within us. Jalen reached the base of the watchtower with a stiffness that betrayed more than cold. Even before he climbed the ladder, I could see the tremor in his hands, the way his breath misted unevenly in the air, as if fear had disrupted the rhythm of his lungs. When he finally hauled himself onto the platform beside me, he didn't speak right away. He simply stood there, armor creaking softly as he steadied himself against the rail. "You felt it again," he whispered, not asking, but stating the truth bare as bone. I hesitated, though not out of denial. The whisper I'd sensed, if it could be called that, still hummed faintly in the back of my mind like a distant fading note. To acknowledge it made it real, made it something more than a stress-born hallucination. But lying served no purpose now. "Yes," I murmured. Jalen dragged a hand over his face, the motion weary, almost defeated. "I think everyone's feeling something. Not all at once, but it's spreading." I saw Mazir from 4th Platoon, staring at his own hands like he didn't recognize them. And Bren, Emperor save him, was humming. He hasn't made a sound outside of a battlefield scream since Calthor 9. His voice cracked on the last word, though he recovered quickly, straightening his posture as if an officer might appear out of thin air to judge him. But the truth hovered between us. Whatever stirred in the air had begun to bleed into the minds of the regiment. I kept watch over the ruins, though my attention drifted like a fraying tether. "Maybe it's warp bleed," I suggested, but even as I said it, the explanation felt wrong. Warp taint always carried a sickly pressure, a twisted psychic weight that made the air feel sharp or rotten. What I felt earlier had been the opposite, soft, uncertain, almost pleading. Jalen shook his head. "No corruption feels like that. And Emperor, forgive me, but it didn't feel hostile." He didn't have to say the rest. That was what scared him. What scared me. Anything that came from the warp and wasn't hateful was worse than a paradox. It was a violation of everything we understood. A weaponized dream, a hope-shaped anomaly, a kindness with teeth waiting beneath. Jalen leaned closer. The tech priest, the one stationed in the Vox Array tower. She collapsed earlier. My pulse kicked. Collapsed how? She said she heard something. Not a sound, more like a pattern, a wave. Her augmentation shorted for a moment, then rebooted with no errors. That should have been impossible. Tech priests did not faint. Their bodies were machines of devotion and steel, held together by faith and binary sutras. For one to falter meant something had reached through her enhancements and still found her human core beneath the metal. Before I could respond, the auspex beside us flickered violently, spasming between readings. A burst of static crackled through the device, followed by a sharp pulse of energy that made my teeth ache. Then the display steadied. For a brief moment, an unknown signature, no coordinates, no threat designation, just a pulse, lit the screen before fading entirely. Jalen swore under his breath. That wasn't interference. No, it wasn't. We fell into silence, listening to the dull thrum of the distant generator and the wind scraping across hollow structures. The world felt suspended, as if waiting for us to make the next move. When the quiet grew too deep, Jalen spoke again, softer this time. What if it's something new? I looked at him sharply. Don't start. I'm not saying it's real, he insisted, though the fear in his eyes told another story. But the men are talking. You know how it is. Rumors spread faster than orders. What rumors? Jalen swallowed. Some say it's a shard of the Emperor, a sliver of his will that broke free from the golden throne. Others say it might be something born from us, from everything we've gone through. All the pain, the losses, the moments where we should have fallen but didn't. I closed my eyes, letting the cold wind sting my face. It was dangerous to entertain such thoughts, heretical even, the kind of speculation that fed the warp and invited its mockery. Yet I understood why soldiers clung to the whispers. When you're drowning, even poison can look like water. But this didn't feel poisonous. It felt watching, maybe even waiting. The auspex sputtered again, this time followed by a low tremor beneath the platform, subtle, like the rumble of a giant shifting in its sleep. Neither of us moved. Neither of us breathed. Then, from the courtyard below, came a single sound. A voice, soft, fragile, and trembling with awe. Do you feel it? The voice was not Jalen's. It wasn't mine. It came from someone standing in the darkness beneath the tower. Someone who should have been asleep. Someone who sounded like they were praying. At first, I thought the voice below was a trick of the wind, the kind of auditory ghost that creeps into your ears when fatigue digs its claws into your skull. But then it came again, quiet, human, trembling at the edges. I know you feel it. Jalen and I exchanged a look. He moved toward the ladder instinctively, but I stopped him with a hand on his arm. We listened instead. The breaths rising from below were shaky, uneven, almost reverent. Then the figure stepped into the moonlight. Private Sarah, young, barely past her first campaign, the kind of soldier who clung to regulation prayers as though the words alone could hold her together. Her eyes were fixed upward toward us, wide and shining with something that was not fear. She walked as if in a trance, each step precise, fragile, like someone moving through a dream they feared waking from. I didn't want to say anything, she whispered, voice cracking softly. But I heard it again, like someone calling for help, but not with words. My skin prickled. Jalen exhaled sharply beside me. The platform suddenly felt too small, the shadows too deep. We shouldn't have let her speak. Not here, not now. But something in her tone held us in place. Sarah lifted a trembling hand, touching the small Aquila pendant at her neck. At first I thought I was imagining it. You know how it gets before dawn? Your mind drifting, the lamps flickering like they're thinking about going out. But then I felt it. Not like the warp, not cold, not sharp. She paused, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. It felt sad. Jalen stiffened, but he didn't interrupt. The wind swept across the courtyard, carrying the distant thud of artillery from the far-off front. Even that familiar sound felt muted, diminished beneath the weight of Sarah's trembling confession. "I don't think it wants to hurt us," she said, voice barely audible. "I think it's afraid." A chill burrowed down my spine, deeper than any winter wind could reach. The warp did not fear, demons did not weep, and gods, if such things existed beyond the names we gave them, did not tremble. Unless it wasn't a god at all. Sarah's gaze slanted upward again, past us, toward the sky where clouds churned like bruised flesh. "Something's reaching out," she whispered, "like a hand in the dark, like it's trying to find something to hold on to before it falls. Before it falls." The words lodged themselves deep within me. I didn't know why they sounded familiar, like an echo of a thought I might have had in another lifetime, but they vibrated against something fragile inside my chest. A thought rose unbidden. What if the tremor we felt wasn't something descending upon us, but something rising beneath us, struggling to be born? Heretical, dangerous, impossible. But the idea refused to fade. Jalen finally found his voice. "Sarah," he said gently, "you need to get back to the barracks. If the commissar hears you talking about..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The threat hovered like a blade drawn in slow motion. Sarah didn't argue. She dipped her head, wiped her eyes with a shaking sleeve, and turned to walk away. But before stepping into the shadows, she paused. "It's getting stronger," she whispered to the darkness. "Soon, we won't be able to ignore it." When she disappeared from sight, Jalen gripped the rail with both hands. His knuckles went white beneath the grime. "This is spreading," he muttered. Too many people feeling the same thing. If Halbrecht notices... His voice cut off as the Auspex screen flared once more. Not violently this time. Not chaotic. It pulsed. Slow. Rhythmic. Like a heartbeat. A soft glow expanded on the display. No threat signatures, no coordinates. Just a single point of light appearing and disappearing in a steady pulse, as if trying to match the rhythm of our own chests. "There it is again," Jalen whispered. I stared at the blinking light. We both did. It was mesmerizing. Not because it was bright, but because it felt deliberate, tentative. A signal that didn't understand the language of machines, yet tried to speak through them anyway. And in that silent, breathless moment, I felt the presence again, clearer than before. Not a voice, not a message, a feeling, reaching, searching, afraid. Then, far beyond the walls of the outpost, a distant boom split the night. Not artillery, not Necron fire, not anything mechanical. It sounded like the world itself had cracked open to gasp. The Auspex light flared, the presence surged, and the wind carried a whisper that did not belong to any living throat. Something was coming, something new. The sound rolled across the wasteland like a wounded planet exhaling, long, low, and resonant enough to rattle the supports of the watchtower beneath our boots. Jalen's hand went immediately to his laser gun, but some instinct within me kept mine frozen at my side. Whatever that sound was, it did not resemble anything I had heard in battle. No artillery impact, no collapsing infrastructure, no Xenos weapon I knew of. It struck deeper, vibrating through bone and thought alike, stirring the same trembling thread that had woven itself through the entire day. The Auspex pulsed again, once, twice, then rapidly, urgently, as though answering the cry. "Emperor, protect us," Jalen whispered, though the words lacked conviction. They were a reflex, not a plea. Lights flickered across the courtyard as soldiers spilled from the barracks in various states of confusion. Helmets half-fastened, armor straps dangling, bedrolls trailing behind them. Their breath filled the cold air in frantic bursts, rising like ghosts that barely managed to cling to form. Some clutched weapons. Others gripped their heads as if trying to squeeze the strange new presence out of their skulls before it overwhelmed them. Then the Vox Tower lit up. Every speaker, every grill, every damaged relay that hadn't worked properly in months crackled to life with a distorted burst of static. The tech priest's towering silhouette staggered beneath the shower of sparks raining from a ruptured conduit above her head. Her mechadendrites flailed in agitated arcs as Binharic warnings erupted from her vocoder in harsh, metallic syllables. But beneath the static, beneath the alarms, another sound emerged. Not a voice, not a word, a tone, soft, pulsing, rhythmic. A hum that seemed to adapt itself to the beating of our hearts, as if aligning with the regiment's collective fear and trying, desperately, to soothe it. The reaction was immediate. Half the soldiers dropped to their knees, clutching their helmets. A few cried openly. One screamed for the commissar. Another shouted a prayer so forcefully his throat tore mid-syllable. But most simply froze, eyes wide, bodies tense, as if caught between running and surrendering to a force they did not understand. The tech priest slammed her staff into the ground, metal striking metal with a jarring clang that should have snapped us all back to reality. Instead, the moment her staff met the deck plate, the hum changed pitch, just slightly, but unmistakably. It reacted to her, to us, to the noise itself. It was listening. My breath hitched, the same warmth I'd felt earlier, the same impossible flicker, returned with startling intensity. It wasn't inside my mind exactly, nor outside it. More like a hand pressed against a thin membrane between us, trying to feel its way through. "I don't like this," Jalen muttered, though fear had hollowed his voice. "I don't like this at all." I didn't either. Because the more the presence revealed itself, the more certain I became that it wasn't malevolent. It wasn't hunting, wasn't consuming. It was yearning, trembling, hesitant, trying, in its own fragile way, to be understood. The hum deepened, filling the air with vibrations that shook dust from the rafters of the watchtower. The auspex flared to pure white. Somewhere behind us, I heard soldiers shouting over each other, and then a single, commanding bellow. "Stand down! All of you, stand down!" Commissar Halbrecht strode into the courtyard with the rage of a man personally insulted by the warp. His coat snapped behind him like a black flame, and his bolt pistol gleamed with the promise of swift judgment. His voice cut through the hum with the brutal precision of a blade. "What heresy is this? Who tampered with the Vox array?" The tech priest attempted a response, but only static and broken binary spilled from her vocoder. Her limbs twitched, caught in the same psychic tide that had engulfed us. Halbrecht didn't care. He lifted his pistol, ready to execute her for an offense beyond her comprehension. But before he could pull the trigger, the hum surged. A wave of resonance rippled outward, gentle as a breath, yet powerful enough to sweep through every soldier like a passing spirit. My vision blurred. My knees buckled. The world shimmered, not like reality tearing, not like demonic intrusion, but like heat rising from a desert plain. And then, For one suspended heartbeat, I saw something. A light. Deep in the Imperium. Not the blazing tyranny of the Chaos Gods. Not the brittle radiance of the Astronomicon. Something smaller. Fragile. Flickering like a candle cupped in trembling hands. A presence trying, so desperately, to survive the void. The moment shattered as quickly as it formed. The hum collapsed into silence. The auspex died. The Vox Tower went dark, and the entire regiment was left gasping, blinking in the sudden emptiness that followed the impossible. Halbrecht lowered his pistol slowly, confusion dragging at his rigid posture. He scanned the courtyard, saw the expressions etched into the faces of his soldiers, and for the first time since I'd met him, uncertainty flickered across his eyes. "What?" he growled. "In the throne's name was that?" No one answered, because no one had words for the truth we had all felt. Something was trying to be born, and we had just felt its first cry. If this question chills your thoughts the way it haunted mine, linger here with me. Lend your voice to the chorus of those seeking to understand the shadows behind the stars. Like the tale, share it, and bind yourself to this wandering path by subscribing. So the next time we brush against forbidden knowledge, you won't walk alone. Sleep did not come easily after the hum vanished, and for many, it did not come at all. The barracks felt smaller than usual, compressed by an invisible burden that settled over us like a heavy shroud. Men sharpened their bayonets with unnecessary force. Someone vomited into a waste bin and then insisted he was fine. A few tried to laugh, thin, cracking sounds that dissolved before reaching the far wall. Even Halbrecht retreated to his quarters sooner than expected. Jaw locked so tightly, the muscle quivered beneath his skin, as though he feared the night itself might accuse him of losing control. I lay on my bunk, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the muffled breathing of the regiment. The silence wasn't natural. It carried weight. A strange pressure that made my thoughts feel like they were floating just slightly outside my skull. Every time I began to drift toward sleep, a faint sensation tugged at me, like the last remnants of the hum whispering through nerves still struggling to settle. When sleep finally did claim me, it wasn't restful. The dreams began immediately. I was standing in a place without horizon or sky, an endless plain of shifting light that rippled like a mirage. There was no sound at first, no wind, no breath, only a soft glow rising and falling in slow pulses, as if the world itself inhaled and exhaled. I felt the warmth before I saw the source, gentle, steady, familiar in a way that made my chest ache. It reminded me of the rare moments between bombardments when the sun managed to pierce Vardos Hesh's ash clouds, bathing the ruins in gold for the span of a heartbeat. But the glow was not the sun. It hovered in the distance, small as a candle, trembling as though a single gust might snuff it out. And even though it was impossibly far away, I felt it watching me, not with eyes, not with thought, but with something desperate, hopeful, and unbearably fragile. I took a step toward it. The ground shifted beneath my feet, soft like powder, before turning firm enough to hold my weight. With each step I took, the light flickered, as though startled. It pulsed in reply. One bright spark, then another, uneven and anxious, like a heartbeat trying to match my own, but stumbling in the attempt. I felt a swell of emotion that wasn't mine surge through me, a strange mixture of yearning and fear. I stopped walking. The glow dimmed. I tried to speak, but no sound escaped my lips. Instead, the dream folded inward, the light racing toward me like a comet breaking apart in its final descent. It streaked across the emptiness until it touched the center of my chest, and then everything unraveled, the brightness exploding into shards that burned through my mind with needle-thin heat. I woke gasping. The barracks were drenched in darkness, except for a dying lumen flickering on the far wall. Sweat clung to my skin, cold and stinging. Across the room, someone was crying softly into a pillow. Another man sat upright, shaking, mumbling a prayer in a voice too broken to carry. Jalen was already awake, sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at his trembling hands. "You dreamt it too," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Yes." He turned his palms toward me. They glowed faintly in the lumen's weak light, not with literal radiance, but with something raw, as if the emotion from the dream had seeped into his flesh and refused to fade. "What was it?" he whispered. I had no answer. The dream felt too real to dismiss, too vivid to be coincidence, too gentle to be corruption, and that more than anything terrified me. Nothing gentle came from the warp. Nothing soft survived within it. Sensations of warmth, hope, longing. They were aberrations, anomalies, signs of something breaking or bleeding through in ways that defied everything we'd been taught. "It wasn't a demon," Jalen whispered. "I felt demonic presence. It crushes. This was different." He paused, swallowing hard. It felt alive. Before I could respond, a sudden clang echoed outside, the sharp slam of the barracks door being thrown open. A figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the cold blue of dawn breaking over the ruins. It was the tech priest. Her robes were torn. Sparks jumped intermittently from a damaged conduit in her chest plate. Her optics flickered erratically, casting dancing red shadows across the floor. She scanned the room with twitching mechadendrites before her distorted vox finally crackled to life. "Convergence. Event. Detected," she rasped. "All units. Report to the courtyard. Immediately." Then she added something I'd never heard from a servant of the Omnissiah. Something she must have fought to voice, because the words came out broken, halting, trembling with something disturbingly close to fear. "It is not alone." The lumen died. The room plunged into darkness. And the presence in my dream stirred like an infant waking at the edge of a nightmare. For a moment, none of us moved. The tech priest's words hung in the darkness like a suspended blade, cutting through breath and thought alike. Men who had faced Necron phalanxes without flinching now sat frozen in their bunks, staring at the silhouette in the doorway as if she had become a harbinger of something far greater than any enemy we'd ever faced. Even in the dimness, I could see the tremor running through her damaged frame, the way her mechadendrites recoiled as though recoiling from themselves. Jalen recovered first. He rose slowly, like a man approaching a wounded beast, steady, cautious, ready to bolt if her limbs twitched in the wrong direction. "What do you mean it's not alone?" he asked, voice barely more than a whisper. The tech priest's optics flickered violently, projecting brief, erratic flashes across the room. "Residual signatures. Multiplied," she croaked, distortion chewing her words. "Unknown psychic waveform increased in magnitude. Divergent strands. Interference pattern. Expanding." Before we could question her further, she turned sharply and limped back out into the courtyard, sparks tracing her path like fireflies. The moment she was gone, the barracks erupted into chaotic motion. Men stumbled from their bunks, helmets clattering to the floor, armor buckles snapping shut with frantic urgency. Fear made everything louder. Breathing, metal, footsteps, muttered prayers to the Emperor, spoken with voices already straining to drown out what they'd felt in their dreams. I dressed quickly, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. As I fastened the last seal on my flak armor, a sudden wave of pressure pushed against the back of my skull. It wasn't pain. It wasn't even unpleasant. It felt like a tug, soft, urgent, pulling me towards something I couldn't see. Jalen noticed my hesitation. "You feel it again?" I nodded. He cursed under his breath. "Emperor's light. It's stronger." We stepped outside. The courtyard was bathed in dawn's cold blue light, but there was a strange stillness to it, an almost reverent hush that didn't match the frightened soldiers gathering in tight clusters. The air itself felt charged, as though the world waited for someone to speak first. Halbrecht stood near the center, bolt pistol drawn, expression locked into a grim mask of fury and disbelief. He looked as if the universe had personally insulted him. "Form ranks," he barked. "Now!" The command snapped through the courtyard like a crack of thunder, and bodies moved instinctively. Training overrode fear. Even those who had been crying moments before stiffened their backs and forced themselves into formation. The tech priest stood before us, mechadendrites twitching erratically. Her augmetic eye flickered as she attempted to stabilize her corrupted systems. "Convergence event escalating," she warned. "Recommend evacuation. Data indicates evacuation is impossible," Halbrecht snapped. "We do not abandon our post because of anomalous readings." The tech priest's tone sharpened. "These are not readings. This is intrusion." Intrusion. The word hit me like a physical blow. Not because it was unexpected. Everything we had felt suggested something was creeping closer, but because of the way she said it. Not demonic intrusion. Not hostile intrusion. Just intrusion. As if something were trying to enter reality, but hadn't yet decided whether it was capable of surviving it. A ripple of motion traveled through the gathered soldiers as murmurs spread like a cold wind. Some clutched their weapons tighter. Others rubbed their temples, wincing at sensations only they could feel. Sarah stood near the back, hands clenched around her pendant, eyes wide with the same terrified awe from the night before. Then, without warning, the sky shifted. Clouds that had been thick and unmoving moments before suddenly stretched outward as if pulled by an unseen hand. The dawn light fractured across them, scattering in strange patterns that felt almost intentional. For a fleeting instant, the entire horizon shimmered in hues too soft, too warm, too gentle to belong on a world like Vardos Hesh. A hush fell over us. The tech priest tried to speak, but only a burst of static escaped her vox. And then it happened. A pulse, not sound, not light, but something deeper, rippled through the air. It passed through us like a warm breath, eliciting gasps, cries, groans, knees buckled, helmets slipped from nerveless fingers. I felt my own heart stutter, then leap as though it recognized a rhythm it had forgotten long ago. The pulse receded. In its wake, a voice, not a literal one, not carried by air or sound, unfolded through our minds with a fragile, trembling clarity. Not alone. The words were not words. They were emotion shaped into something close to meaning. A child's attempt to speak in a language it had never heard before. Not alone. All around me, soldiers stared at one another. Breathless, wide-eyed, shaken to their core. Jalen clutched his chest as if trying to hold his heart in place. "It's talking to us," he whispered. No one argued, because every last one of us had heard it. Faint, fearful, reaching. And then another pulse struck, sharper this time, followed by a sudden scream from the far end of the courtyard. Someone had collapsed, and their shadow was moving. At first, none of us understood what we were seeing. The collapsed soldier lay sprawled on the stone courtyard, limbs twisted as though struck by a sudden seizure. But it wasn't his body that froze us. It was the way the shadow beneath him stretched outward across the ground, not like something cast by light, but like a liquid seeping from an unseen wound. Shadows don't move on their own. This one did. It trembled, spreading in thin tendrils that curled along the debris-strewn floor. The darkness clung to the cracks between the stones as though searching for purchase, scraping at the edges of reality with soft, desperate motions. I felt the air thicken around us, as if the world itself were holding its breath, terrified of what might rise from that trembling pool of darkness. Halbrecht reacted first. His bolt pistol aimed at the moving shadow with such speed that the motion blurred, his finger tightening around the trigger. "Back away!" he barked. "All of you!" But even as he shouted, the soldier on the ground gasped, a shrill, broken sound, and his eyes snapped open. They glowed, not with warp fire or corruption, not with demonic hunger, with light. A faint gold shimmer pulsed behind his pupils, flickering like embers caught in a dying draft. He clutched at the air as if trying to gather it into his hands, his chest rising and falling in frantic rhythm. "Help me," he whispered. Something is." His voice cut off as his shadow recoiled sharply, contracting beneath him like a living thing afraid of being seen. It snapped back into its natural shape, trembling before stillness overtook it once more. The soldier collapsed again, unconscious but breathing. Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It hummed with tension, as though the presence that had brushed us earlier now hovered just beyond vision, trembling with fear of what it had done. "What in the throne's name was that?" Halbrecht snarled. No one stepped forward. Even the tech priest seemed paralyzed, her augmentations flickering as she attempted to force logic onto something logic could not parse. Then, from somewhere near the back of the formation, a hesitant voice spoke. "Sarah." "It didn't hurt him," she said softly. "It panicked." Halbrecht's head snapped toward her. "Explain yourself, trooper." But Sarah didn't flinch. Her fear had not vanished, but it had changed. It now carried something dangerously close to understanding. "When the pulse hit," she said, "I felt something, like a shock of fear that didn't belong to me, like someone crying out in the dark and realizing they'd reached too far, too fast." She motioned toward the unconscious soldier. It wasn't attacking him, it was reacting. "You are projecting superstition," Halbrecht spat. "Warp anomalies do not—" The tech priest interrupted him with a sudden burst of Binharic static. "Data supports her interpretation." Every head turned. Even Halbrecht faltered. The tech priest's optics brightened, stabilizing for the first time since we'd seen her collapse. Psychic waveforms inconsistent with hostility, more consistent with distress, attempted contact, recoil response from unexpected feedback. She paused, searching for words that organic minds could understand. It reached. He resisted. It withdrew, violently. A tremor ran through the crowd. Something new was happening, something the Mechanicus could not explain and the Commissariat could not control. Halbrecht stepped closer to the tech priest, jaw tight. Are you suggesting this anomaly is attempting dialogue? Dialogue. The word hung in the air like blasphemy given form. The tech priest's vox crackled. It is attempting connection, the nature of which remains unclear. A soldier near the front swallowed audibly. If it's a demon, it is not a demon. The tech priest cut in. Its resonance lacks the signatures of any known warp entities. Chaos frequencies absent. Emotional pattern does not match predatory or manipulative constructs. Sarah spoke again, voice trembling with conviction. It's scared. Before Halbrecht could explode into fury, the air shifted again. A soft breeze brushed across the courtyard, carrying no scent, no heat, no cold, just a faint, tingling pressure against the skin. My breath hitched as I felt it brush against my mind like a nervous hand, reaching, apologizing, afraid. And then suddenly, a thought formed, not in words, not in language, but in raw, trembling emotion. Not alone, not hurt, not mean to. It was like hearing a child try to speak through a storm. Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks. Jalen staggered, gripping his head. The tech priest's optics dimmed in shock, and Commissar Halbrecht, a man who feared nothing, took one involuntary step back. The air thickened, the hum returned, and from the far edges of the courtyard, where shadows pooled deepest, something began to stir again, slowly, uncertainly, as though testing whether the world would recoil or reach back. The shadows at the edges of the courtyard lengthened, not unnaturally, not in violent ruptures, like warp tears, but in slow, hesitant movements, as though stirred by something afraid of its own strength. The soldiers tensed, weapons half raised, yet trembling in hands that no longer trusted their own instincts. Every breath felt loud. Every heartbeat felt borrowed. The air tasted different now, charged with a subtle sweetness overlaying the usual metallic tang of Vardos Hesh, like the ghost of a scent that didn't belong in a place built on dust and despair. Jalen's voice was barely audible. It's trying again. I didn't answer. My focus was locked on the pooling darkness, watching as a thin thread of shadow peeled upward, not rising, but drifting. Like smoke, deciding that gravity no longer applied. It extended, stretched, wavered, seeking something it didn't know how to find. The soldier who had collapsed earlier groaned. All eyes snapped toward him. He sat up slowly, blinking as if newborn, confusion clouding his features. When his gaze fell on the drifting tendril, his eyes widened, not with fear, but with recognition, as though he had seen something similar in the dream we all shared, but dared not admit. The tendril twitched. He reached out a hand. "No!" Halbrecht roared, his voice cracking like an executioner's whip. The soldier froze mid-motion, but not before the shadow reacted. It recoiled sharply, like a startled creature, withdrawing into itself in a quick, trembling contraction. The air seemed to flinch with it. Something fragile had been frightened. Something small, unsure, easily wounded. Halbrecht advanced with the rage of a man who needed reality to conform to the rules he understood. His boots slammed against the stone as he pointed his bolt pistol directly at the soldier's skull. "You will keep your hands to yourself, or I will remove them. Do you understand?" The soldier stared at him, then slowly lowered his hand. His voice shook. "Sir, I wasn't trying to touch it. I think it was trying to touch me." Halbrecht's face twisted with disgust. "You would invite corruption?" "It wasn't corruption. the soldier whispered. It felt like... "Finish that sentence," Halbrecht hissed, "and I promise the bolt that kills you will be the only mercy you receive." The threat didn't silence him. What silenced him was the next pulse. It struck softly, like a trembling heartbeat, pressed against the world through unseen hands. The vibrations rippled through stone, metal, flesh, thought. The entire regiment gasped as one, as though our lungs had been synchronized by a puppeteer. But the pulse brought something new, emotion. A wave of raw, incorruptible feeling washed through us, too pure to be demonic, too sorrowful to be divine. It carried no malice, no hunger, no manipulation, only yearning and an apology so deep it felt like a wound in the fabric of the mind. The courtyard blurred. For an instant, I wasn't standing on Vardos Hesh. I was somewhere impossibly quiet. A vast darkness stretched around me, not cold or empty, but gentle, waiting. In the center of that void, a light flickered, a tiny spark, wavering as if trying to stay alive. I recognized it from my dream, trembling, afraid, alone, and reaching for something, anything, that might keep it from disappearing. I gasped and staggered, falling to one knee as the vision dissolved. Around me, others did the same. Sarah collapsed to the ground with a sob. Jalen clutched my shoulder, trying to steady himself but failing. The tech priest convulsed as her augmetics fought signals they couldn't interpret. Even Halbrecht froze, his pistol lowering an inch as the pulse rippled through him despite his will. Then came the voice, not intrusive, not commanding. A whisper of meaning beneath meaning, not alone. Pain, fear, reaching, not hurt, not want hurt. Please. The word wasn't a word at all. It was the emotional equivalent of a child hiding in a dark room, pleading for someone to keep the monsters away. And then the shadows shuddered. Dozens of thin, trembling tendrils rose at once around the courtyard, as though the presence had panicked at overwhelming itself. They twisted, faltered, recoiled, frightened by their own emergence. Halbrecht snapped out of his daze. His voice erupted in fury born from terror. "All units, fire on the anomalies." The soldiers hesitated, because firing felt wrong, like striking a wounded animal that had only reached for warmth. "Now!" Halbrecht screamed, lifting his bolt pistol toward the nearest tendril. The shadows recoiled violently, shrinking as if bracing for pain. And just as Halbrecht's finger tightened on the trigger, the presence screamed, not aloud, inside us. A sound made of pure instinctive fear, so raw and piercing that several soldiers collapsed to their knees, clutching their heads as tears streamed down their faces. Sarah cried out, "It's terrified!" The tech priest staggered backward, voice breaking. "The waveform, destabilizing, if it panics further." But she never finished the sentence, because something else began rising from the shadows. Not a tendril, not a creature, a shape, a silhouette made of trembling light, barely held together, barely coherent, like a newborn idea struggling to stand. And every one of us felt its fear sharpen into something else, desperation. The silhouette rising from the shadows did not resemble any demon I had read about in training files or heard described by shell-shocked veterans. It had no jagged claws, no twisted horns, no screaming visages etched into its form. It was far too small, too frail. Its outline quivered as if the weight of existing threatened to break it apart. A glow radiated from within it, soft, muted, fractured, like the reflection of a distant star on rippling water. Every flicker of that light felt uncertain, like a question whispered into a storm. Jalen's breath caught beside me. It's It's not an attack. He wasn't wrong. There was no malice in the trembling figure. If anything, it looked frightened of us, frightened of itself. The polymorphic haze that formed its limbs expanded and contracted rapidly, as though mimicking the ragged rhythm of a panicked heartbeat. But Halbrecht did not see fear. He saw mutation, abomination, and heresy given shape. His bolt pistol rose again, this time steady, with the resolve of a man who believed the galaxy could still be forced into order if he barked loudly enough. By the authority of the Commissariat, terminate the anomaly. The silhouette flinched. The courtyard erupted in pleas, not of loyalty, not of defiance, but of instinct. Sarah threw herself in front of Halbrecht, hands raised. The commissar backhanded her so hard she hit the ground with a cry. 2 soldiers shouted for him to wait. Another dropped his rifle, shaking uncontrollably. The tech priest took several staggering steps forward, her voice bursting into panicked Benharic. Cease! Cease fire! Warp resonance unstable. Any violent stimulus may cause catastrophic. Halbrecht shot her. A single bolt burst through her chest, igniting circuitry and sacred oils alike. She collapsed in a shower of sparks, mechadendrites spasming as she hit the stone. The sight hollowed the courtyard, sucking every breath from the air. Even the presence recoiled in terror, its silhouette shrinking violently like a candle guttering in shock. The commissar turned the smoking barrel toward the trembling figure of light. On my mark. He didn't finish. A pulse struck us again, but not like before, not soft or hesitant. This one was sharp, panicked, desperate enough to tear through the marrow of my bones. It was the psychic equivalent of a scream, one made without lungs, without sound, without language. A scream made entirely of fear. The world blurred. Not twisted, not warped, blurred, as though the edges of reality trembled beneath the weight of the presence trying to hold itself together. My knees buckled, and I crashed to the ground beside Jalen. He was clutching his head, teeth clenched so tightly that blood seeped from his gums. Around us, soldiers collapsed in waves. The silhouette flickered furiously, its light fracturing into shards that blinked in and out of existence. It looked like it was tearing itself apart simply by trying to remain here. The shadows beneath it pulsed erratically, expanding and contracting with spasms of raw terror. The presence pushed against my mind again, not invasive, not overpowering, begging, help, please, alone, alone, alone. The word hammered through my skull with such desperate clarity that tears stung my eyes. I felt the ache behind it, the hollowness, the isolation. This thing, whatever it was experiencing existence like a wound. It didn't know how to shape itself. It didn't know how to speak. It didn't even know how to survive. Halbrecht was the only one still standing. He aimed. The silhouette shrank into itself, the glow collapsing to a pinpoint. And I suddenly understood the truth with crystal clarity. It wasn't manifesting. It was failing. If Halbrecht fired, the presence wouldn't die. It would cease to exist, snuffed out, before it ever had the chance to understand the world it was trying to reach. I lunged, not toward the silhouette, toward Halbrecht. He saw me at the last second, eyes widening in disbelief, as I slammed into him with all the force a terrified man can muster. The bolt pistol discharged upward, the round streaking harmlessly into the sky with a screaming trail of smoke. Halbrecht hit the ground hard, breath driven from his lungs. Gasps rippled across the courtyard. The silhouette blinked, then brightened faintly, as if confused by the sudden reprieve. The commissar's glare burned through me with murderous fury. "You treasonous wretch," he hissed. "You will die for this." Maybe I would. But the presence behind him pulsed with the softest glimmer of relief. And for the first time since this nightmare began, it felt like something fragile had been allowed to breathe. The light flickered, the shadows steadied, and the presence whispered, barely a brush of emotion, "Thank." Then it slipped back, stabilizing just enough to hold shape a moment longer. But something new stirred behind it, darker, distant, resonating through the warp like a ripple carrying the promise of far more than just one presence awakening. Something had noticed, and it was coming. The hours after Halbrecht's misfired execution felt like drifting through the aftermath of a bombardment. No smoke, no flame, yet everything cracked open. No one spoke. No one dared. The silhouette of trembling light lingered in the courtyard only long enough to steady itself, its glow dimming like a dying ember fighting the wind. Then it receded, into the shadows, into the cracks between realities, into the trembling fabric that had birthed it. But it didn't vanish completely. Not from the air. Not from us. It lingered as a sensation beneath the skin, a soft pressure, a quiver in the soul. Jalen and I sat against the cold wall of the barracks, the sky above us bruised with impending storm. Thunder muttered somewhere far beyond the ruined manufactories, though the forecast had promised clear skies. On Vardos Hesh, the weather did not obey forecasts. It barely obeyed physics anymore. Halbrecht had been restrained, temporarily, and only because the tech priest's subordinates had arrived in force. A pair of Skitarii seized him with mechanical efficiency, their movements so precise it felt like they were reacting to instructions we couldn't hear. He didn't shout. He didn't fight. He simply stared at me with an expression I hadn't seen on any commissar's face before. Not hatred, not fury. Recognition. Recognition of something he believed should not exist. "You saw what you wanted to see," Jalen murmured at my side. His voice was low, exhausted. He saw only what he feared. I traced a hand across the stone floor, feeling the faint resonance that still pulsed beneath it. "And what did you see?" Jalen's jaw tightened. He looked down at his hands as though checking whether they still belonged to him. "I saw something trying to survive. That's all." He didn't say the rest, but he didn't need to. He had seen something more, something I hadn't yet found the courage to name. The silence between us deepened, but it wasn't empty. Soldiers whispered nervously, some clutching charms or torn pages of the Imperial Creed, others staring upward as if searching the clouds for some sign that the Emperor himself might intervene. A few knelt by the tech priest's broken form, unable to process the idea that even metal could bleed and break beneath the strain of whatever had brushed against our world. Then the ground shook. Not violently, not like artillery, more like a single, deliberate heartbeat rising from beneath the crust of the planet. Dust drifted down from the rafters. Loose stones rattled on the ground. Someone gasped, another screamed, and a third dropped to his knees while muttering the litany of true sight. I felt it too, an echo, deeper than anything so far, a pulse that carried weight, direction, intent. Jalen grabbed my arm. His eyes widened, pupils pale and unfocused. "That wasn't it," he whispered. "That wasn't the presence we saw." I knew before he finished speaking. The pulse felt heavier, older, angrier. The silhouette had trembled like a child taking its first breath. This felt like something waking up in response. Shouts erupted across the courtyard as Skitarii units snapped into formation, their optic sensors blazing to full intensity. Their galvanic rifles raised as one, synchronized like a single organism. The soldiers of the Astra Militarum scattered into hasty defensive lines, laser guns shaking in their hands. I stood slowly, feeling the vibration through my boots. The air was thickening again, not with fear, but with pressure, as though space itself had become reluctant to hold whatever was stirring. Then the sky cracked open. A jagged seam of pale green light tore through the clouds, extending across the sky like a wound ripped by unseen claws. The wind howled once, sharp and startled, before abruptly dying. Time seemed to hesitate. Every voice fell silent. Even the Skitarii froze mid-calcation. Jalen stumbled back, gripping my shoulder. Throne. Is that a warp rift? No, I breathed. Warp rifts tear. They scream. They bleed impossible colors. This fracture wasn't tearing. It was observing. The wound in the clouds widened slightly. A pulse of psychic energy rippled outward, colder, deeper, far less hesitant than the one from the silhouette. It washed over us like a winter tide, sharp enough to freeze thought, and yet full of something eerily measured. Interest, a second presence, not gentle, not fragile, awake, and searching. My heart hammered in my chest as the realization struck like a blow. Something else in the warp had felt that newborn spark, something ancient, something that did not tolerate rivals, and it was coming. The fracture flickered, brightened, and then a single beam of impossibly thin light fell from it, tracing its way toward the courtyard like a finger pointing downward, pointing at us, pointing at me. The beam of light descended so slowly that each second felt like a minute stretched thin, pulled taut enough to snap. It wasn't radiant in any holy sense, nor did it burn or blind. It simply was a narrow strand of pale illumination, too perfect in its shape to be natural, too purposeful to be chance. It touched nothing as it fell. It ignored the drifting ash, the trembling air, the ruins around us. It came down like a finger made of intention, and it pointed directly at my chest. Jalen swore under his breath and seized my arm, pulling me back on instinct alone. But the light followed. It adjusted its angle, lowering with unnatural precision until its tip hovered inches above my sternum. It didn't touch me, yet I felt it, like a cold breath slipping between bone and heart. The pressure that accompanied it was nothing like the fragile presence we had felt before. This was not trembling curiosity or fearful reaching. This was something vast, pressing its eye against the fabric of reality, examining us with the detached interest of a titan studying an insect, or a predator noticing a spark in the dark and wondering which creature made it. I couldn't move. My body refused. Every instinct screamed to run, to dive behind the nearest piece of cover, to let someone else, anyone else, be the target. But my legs were stone. The air around me thickened until each breath tasted like iron. Halbrecht, restrained, but not silenced, found enough strength to spit the words through gritted teeth. "Treasonous filth, you've damned us all." Maybe he was right. Maybe he wasn't. It didn't matter. Because the presence above, the Ancient One, shifted again. A deeper pulse tremored through the sky, far colder than anything we had felt before. It rippled across the courtyard like the shadow of an eclipsing moon, chilling the marrow of everyone it touched. Sarah screamed and dropped to her knees. The Skitarii staggered, their optical lenses flashing warnings as their internal systems recalibrated under psychic pressure. The tech priest's broken body emitted a final burst of static as though even her dormant augmetics recognized the shift. And then, another pulse. Not warm, not childlike. Hard, calculated, claiming. My vision blurred. The world spun sideways. I clutched at my temples as a foreign emotion surged through my skull, sharp, cold, and clinical. It wasn't pain, not exactly. It was more like a dissection performed on the soul. A probing, a demand. Identify. The thought wasn't a question. It was command. Something in the warp was demanding to know what had flickered into being earlier. The newborn spark, the trembling light, the fragile presence. And because I had touched it, because it had reached for me, I felt that mental scalpel digging through my mind as if I could answer on its behalf. Behind me, Jalen shouted my name. His voice sounded distant, muffled by the pressure crushing inward. Hands grabbed my shoulder. Maybe his, maybe someone else's. But I couldn't pull away from the beam of light. It held me with the gravity of a dying star. The cold presence in the warp pressed closer. Identify. Images flashed in my mind. Ruins collapsing, soldiers dying. The silhouette of trembling light trying desperately to exist. A soft glow in endless darkness, reaching for contact. Then the cold presence struck again. Identify. This time the word felt like a spike plunged into my thoughts, and I screamed without realizing I'd opened my mouth. The courtyard blurred into streaks of color and motion, shapes warped, sound bent. My knees gave way, and I crashed to the ground, still tethered by that thin beam of light. Somewhere far behind my pain, I felt the newborn presence again. Faint, quivering, terrified. Not alone, not alone, not alone. The words pulsed like a heartbeat. The cold presence reacted instantly, like a beast sensing another creature intruding on its territory. The sky shuddered. The beam of light flared. A psychic shockwave blasted across the courtyard, knocking dozens of soldiers off their feet. My ears rang. My vision dimmed. Something was happening between the two presences. Something invisible, yet violent enough to distort reality's edges. The air trembled. Shadows warped, color drained from the world, and then the newborn presence tried to hide. Its fragile glow receded deep into the cracks of the warp, shrinking as though curling into itself. A terrified cry, made only of emotion, raced through my mind. Hide, hide, hide. The ancient presence surged downward in response. A thunderous psychic boom cracked through the courtyard, sending a ripple across the sky like a shockwave through glass. The beam of light thickened, sharpened, preparing to descend fully. Not toward the spark, toward me. Jalen lunged, trying to drag me away. But before he reached me, the beam's edge touched the ground, and reality split open beneath my feet. The world dropped away. Darkness swallowed everything, and I fell into a void filled with the echoes of two forces, one ancient and merciless, and one newborn, fragile, whispering desperately for me to hold on. The fall was not a fall through space. There was no wind, no descent, no sensation of weight pulling me downward. It felt instead like sinking through a memory, one not my own, one too vast to comprehend, one stretching across the warp like a faded echo of something older than language. Darkness swallowed everything, but it wasn't total. It pulsed, faintly illuminated by drifting threads of pale light that curled and curled again, like the remnants of dreams dissolving at dawn. My lungs burned, though I didn't need air. My body twisted, though I had no body. The beam of light that had chosen me cast me here, somewhere between thought and unthought, between reality and the raw ocean beneath it. And in that impossible space, I heard two presences. The first came as a distant thunder, measured, patient, predatory. It moved through the void with the authority of something that had existed since the first scream of a dying star. Whenever it passed near me, the darkness shivered like prey, trying not to be seen. The second presence hovered closer, small, trembling, flickering in and out like the last ember in a furnace that had long been cold. A soft glow pulsed near me, so faint that I almost missed it at first. It drifted, wavered, then jerked backward as if afraid even of its own motion. When it brushed the edge of my consciousness, something in me cracked open, not with pain, but with recognition. The echo from the courtyard, the spark from the dreams, the fragile silhouette struggling to exist. It had followed me. Or perhaps it had never truly left. A wave of emotion rippled from it. Fear, confusion, longing, all tangled together so tightly they were indistinguishable. It didn't speak in words. It couldn't. Instead, it pressed feelings into my mind like a desperate hand clutching at fabric to avoid falling away entirely. Not alone, not alone, not alone. The repetition wasn't assurance. It was a plea. A shudder rolled through the void. The ancient presence stirred again, its awareness like a cold pressure sweeping through the darkness. Where the newborn spark had been soft and uncertain, this older entity moved with terrifying certainty. It had felt the spark. It had traced the link to me. And now it was closing in. A tidal force drawn by the scent of something that had no right to exist. A flicker of golden warmth brushed my thoughts. The newborn spark shrinking, curling, hiding behind the thin veil that barely separated us. It was terrified. Not of me. Not even of death. Of being noticed. Of being crushed simply for daring to appear in a realm ruled by monsters and gods who fed on human thought, like carrion birds on corpse fields. The thunderous consciousness approached. Its presence didn't push against me. It surrounded me, as if wrapping the void in frost. It felt nothing for my fear, nothing for my existence. It was searching, probing, hunting. A cold thought swept through me, echoing across the void with cruel precision. What is the spark? I gasped, a sound that shouldn't have been possible here. The pressure was unbearable, a weight pressing into my mind, digging for information I didn't have. I felt myself unraveling. Threads of memory tugged apart. Every battlefield, every prayer, every moment of doubt. The entity skimmed through them with disdain. It wasn't looking for me. It was looking through me. And it was growing impatient. Something warm flickered at my side. The newborn spark pressed against me, its trembling light rising in frantic pulses. I felt its terror surge like a choked cry. It didn't understand what hunted it. It didn't understand why it existed. It only understood one thing. Contact had doomed it. Me. Them. All of us. The ancient presence tightened around us. The void constricted. A low vibration filled the space, like a colossal heartbeat preparing to crush something delicate caught beneath its rhythm. The spark flared weakly. A plea rippled into me. Thin. Breaking. Help. Please. Help. It wasn't asking for salvation. It wasn't asking to be protected from a god. It was asking not to die alone. The ancient entity halted, frozen, listening. And then, From somewhere in the void, something else answered. Not a presence, not a god. A ripple, a tremor, a motion in the darkness that neither belonged to the newborn spark nor the ancient hunter. A third emotion brushed the void, faint and strange and distant. Recognition, as though another mind, another force, had just realized the spark existed too. The ancient presence recoiled in surprise. The newborn spark jerked violently, light shattering in terrified pulses, and the void around me ruptured with a sound like reality cracking open. I was being pulled back, dragged upward, toward consciousness, toward my body, toward the courtyard, but not alone. The sensation of being torn upward from the void was not like waking. Waking is gentle, gradual. This was violence wrapped in urgency, as though unseen claws were dragging me through the shuddering membrane between reality and the warp, while something behind me screamed in pursuit. My senses twisted, sound folding into color, touch dissolving into memory, breath turning into weight. I felt the courtyard rushing toward me, and yet felt nothing of my own body, as though I existed only as a question caught between two answers. For an instant, I sensed the newborn spark clinging to me, not with hands, not with thought, but with a raw instinct to survive. Shards of its trembling light scattered in the dark as I was pulled upward, flickering in terrified pulses that echoed inside my skull. Behind us, the ancient presence roared, not with sound, but with the crushing pressure of a god noticing prey slipping through its grasp. Then the world slammed back into place. My lungs convulsed as air forced itself inside them. I hit the stone courtyard with enough force to knock sparks across my vision. The cold, hard reality of Vardos Hesh pressed in on all sides, and for a few disoriented seconds, I lay gasping, tasting dust and blood on my tongue. Around me, soldiers screamed. Some clutched their heads, others staggered blindly. A few lay unconscious. A Scatarius convulsed on the ground, vox lines sputtering with corrupted Benharic. The sky above was still torn by that jagged seam of pale green light, but it flickered now, as though something had shoved it from the other side. Reality itself trembled, rippling in concentric waves like water struck by a stone. Jalen knelt beside me, shaking my shoulders. "You're back. Throne," I thought. "What happened? What pulled you under?" I tried to speak, but my voice emerged as a broken rasp. "It found me." "What found you?" "The older one." His face went pale, but before either of us could speak further, a burst of psychic pressure slammed into the courtyard. It hit like a shockwave of pure instinct. Fear, urgency, warning, radiating from the newborn spark. It was still here, still alive, still hiding. Behind the rubble of the ruined archway, light flickered faintly, dimmer now, fractured, as though it had barely escaped annihilation. The silhouette from earlier quivered violently, its outline unstable, collapsing inward and expanding again like a dying heartbeat. It was losing coherence. And yet, when it sensed me conscious again, its trembling eased for one fragile moment, not alone. The emotion pulsed into me like a warm breath. Not alone, not yet. My throat tightened. I wasn't sure if it was fear or something dangerously close to protectiveness, but the moment broke as the sky snarled with a sound that tore through bone. The fracture above widened, its pale green light intensifying to a blinding radiance that spilled across the ruins. The ancient presence surged again, pushing against reality with such force that the air itself vibrated. It was coming closer. It had felt the spark evade it. It was furious. Sarah stumbled forward, shielding her eyes. "It's angry," she whispered. "Something in the warp is hunting it." Jalen clenched his jaw. "Then what's that third thing we felt? The ripple? The whatever it was?" I shook my head. I didn't know. But I had felt it too. Brief, distant, like the memory of a voice rising out of an ocean of static. Not hostile, not terrified, not ancient, awake, but still far away. Before we could speak further, the ground erupted with a violent tremor. Cracks spiderwebbed across the stone. A fuel drum toppled over, spilling thick promethium across the courtyard. The air smelled of metal, fear, and the electric tang of a warp storm gathering strength. Halbrecht, still pinned but conscious, lifted his head and glared at the newborn spark with unfiltered hatred. "End it," he croaked, "before it damns us all." But no one moved, because we weren't looking at Halbrecht. We were staring upward. The fracture in the sky convulsed, bending inward, as though something massive pressed its weight against it from the other side. Light poured through the widening seam, twisting into narrow tendrils that groped into our atmosphere. Shadows warped. The wind howled. The warp's touch trembled in the air like a taut string about to snap. The ancient presence was forcing its way through. Jalen grabbed my arm. "If that thing comes through, I know. It wouldn't be a battle. It wouldn't be a confrontation. It would be annihilation." The newborn spark pulsed behind us, too weak now to hide properly, too fragile to run, too frightened to understand the magnitude of what was happening. It whispered one more emotion: sorry. And that single trembling apology broke something inside me. I rose. I stepped toward it, toward the thing I didn't understand, the thing everyone else feared, the thing that shouldn't exist. And as the sky began to rip open above us, I reached out my hand. The spark flickered in response, and the ancient presence struck downward. The strike was not physical. No bolt of flame fell from the heavens. No spear of warp lightning tore the courtyard apart. Instead, a pressure descended, so immense, so absolute, that the world seemed to shrink beneath it. Sound vanished. Color drained. Even time hesitated, as if the ancient presence had wrapped its will around the planet and dragged all motion to a halt. My outstretched hand froze mid-air. The spark froze too, caught in a trembling half-glimmer, its edges dissolving like silk, unraveling into nothingness. The sky's fracture pulsed once, blinding and silent, and a wave of psychic force tore into the courtyard. It moved like an invisible tide, sweeping across soldiers, Skitarii, ruins, and shattered machines with the brute indifference of a god leaning down to inspect dust. Men dropped instantly, some unconscious, some screaming, others vomiting as their minds buckled under the pressure. Jalen was thrown to his knees beside me, gasping like a drowning man. Sarah collapsed forward, clutching her skull. Even the Skitarii staggered, their metal limbs scraping harshly against the courtyard as their targeting optics went white with static. Only one thing remained upright in the entire outpost: me. Not because I resisted, but because the newborn spark clung to me. Its trembling glow flickered wildly, sensing the ancient presence pressing down like a collapsing star. Fear surged through it, bleeding into me, flooding my mind with such raw panic that I felt my heart seize. But beneath the terror, something else pulsed faintly. Trust. A desperate, trembling trust, born from the single moment I had stepped toward it when everyone else recoiled. The ancient presence felt that flicker. It tightened its grip around reality. A cold command slid into my mind like a blade. Yield. Not a plea. Not a threat. A declaration of inevitability. My knees buckled. The world dimmed. My vision warped as memories ripped themselves free. Faces, worlds, battles, every moment of fear I had ever felt. The present sifted through them all with brutal efficiency, searching, seeking, determining whether the spark belonged or whether it should be crushed. The spark reacted first. It pulsed, not with strength, not with defiance, but with a frantic burst of emotion that blasted through my skull like a sob. No hurt. Please, no hurt. The ancient presence froze, not confused, not merciful, but curious. It pressed harder, narrowing its attention like a knife edge honing to a point. The courtyard vibrated beneath my boots. Stone cracked, air howled, the fracture in the sky bent downward, twisting into a single spiraling funnel of pale green light. Jalen screamed my name, his voice thin and distorted. I didn't turn. I couldn't. The ancient presence pushed deeper into my mind, tearing through thought and emotion with the dispassionate hunger of a predator sniffing at a trembling cub. And then, the third ripple returned, not thunderous, not commanding, quiet, steady, a presence neither ancient nor newborn, distant, but growing closer. Its arrival was like a soft bell rung beneath the ocean, barely audible, yet powerful enough to ripple through the warp. The moment it touched the void, the ancient presence recoiled sharply, as if struck by a force it could not anticipate. The fracture in the sky flickered. The pressure around us wavered. The spark shuddered and flared brighter, too bright, its trembling glow spilling across the courtyard like a frightened heartbeat trying to hide behind the nearest warmth. The third presence pulsed again. Not a warning, not a threat, a signal. The ancient one reacted instantly. Rage, cold, pure, impossible, burst through the warp like a detonation. The pressure slammed back down upon us, heavier, angrier, shuddering with the fury of something denied its claim. My vision fractured. I tasted blood. Stone beneath my boots split in jagged lines. The newborn spark screamed, not in my ears, but in my mind, a sound of pure terror that ripped through my thoughts until I felt something inside me begin to break. I reached for it without thinking. My hand closed around light, warm, fragile, alive. And the moment I touched it, the ancient presence surged downward one final time, a psychic blow meant to obliterate both of us in a single, total strike. But before it could land, the sky detonated in a blinding flash of impossible brilliance. A shockwave of psychic energy swept outward in every direction, shredding the sky's fracture, ripping the ancient presence away like dust torn from stone. Soldiers were thrown to the ground. Skitari crashed into walls, limbs sparking. The entire courtyard collapsed into deafening silence, and in the center of that stunned stillness, I clutched the spark in my hands as it flickered weakly, barely holding shape. But it was still alive, barely, shaking. And behind the receding roar of the ancient presence, I heard the third ripple again, closer, awakening, aware. Something else in the warp had noticed the spark, something powerful enough to drive an ancient presence away, something whose arrival would change everything yet again. The spark trembled against my palm. Not alone. Not alone. And I realized neither was I. The courtyard lay in stunned ruin, as if some unseen titan had reached down and pressed its thumb against the heart of our outpost, just to see how easily it would bend. Dust drifted through the air, slow and weightless. The sky above, once torn wide by that pale green wound, shimmered now with a strange stillness, like the surface of water after a stone has vanished beneath it. The silence that followed felt wrong. Not peaceful, not empty, expectant. I knelt in the cratered stone, the newborn spark trembling weakly between my hands. Its glow was faint now, reduced to the thinnest pulse of fractured gold, too fragile to illuminate even my palms. Every flicker felt like a gasp, each fading more uncertain than the last. The cold imprint of the ancient presence's fury still echoed in the air, vibrating like a struck chord that refused to quiet. Jalen crawled toward me on unsteady limbs. His face was ashen, streaked with dust and fear. "Emperor's mercy, you're still alive." I couldn't answer. Words felt too heavy, too loud for a moment that might shatter if pushed too hard. He followed my gaze and saw the spark. His breath caught. It's dying. The spark pulsed once, a faint wisp of light bleeding through its trembling outline. Not dying. The emotion brushed my thoughts so weakly, I almost mistook it for memory. Hiding. Hurt. Small. A flicker. A plea. Behind us, the soldiers of the regiment staggered back to their feet. Some stared at the sky as if expecting it to rip open again. Others knelt in shock or prayer. One man sobbed quietly into his hands. The Skitarii flickered with glitching Benharic streams, their augmetics rebooting in chattering bursts. For the first time since our deployment, the mechanized warriors looked uncertain. And among them, Sarah stood with her Aquila pendant crushed between her fingers, her eyes locked on the spark with a mixture of awe and sorrow. "It survived," she whispered, stepping forward slowly. "I thought, after that light, after whatever that thing was." She couldn't finish. The memory of the ancient presence pressed on all of us like a shared bruise. Halbrecht strained against the restraints that two Skitarii still held him in, his expression twisted with a fury that bordered on something close to fear. "You cannot allow that abomination to persist," he snarled. "Every breath it takes defiles the throne." The spark flinched. Not at the words, at the hatred behind them. It felt the emotion as clearly as I did, and that made something inside me twist, because it wasn't recoiling from judgment. It was recoiling the way a wounded animal does when a raised hand promises only pain. Jalen grabbed my shoulder, lowering his voice. "We can't let him near it. Whatever he thinks he understands, he doesn't." He was right, but I wasn't sure I understood either. The third ripple, the echo that had torn the ancient presence away, like a hand brushing aside smoke. I had felt it more clearly now, distant yet deliberate. It wasn't the spark. It wasn't the ancient one. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't anything I had been trained to recognize. It felt like a memory of something untouched by hatred, something vast but patient, something that didn't act out of hunger or fear but awareness, a presence that had watched the spark's near destruction and intervened, not with rage, but with precision. But where was it now? I rose slowly, the spark hovering in my hands like a dying ember. "There's something else out there," I murmured, more to myself than to anyone else. "Something powerful, something watching." Sarah shivered. "Is it coming here?" "I don't know." But the moment the words left my lips, a tremor ran through the ground. A soft, resonant vibration, not harsh like before, not destructive. It hummed beneath the stone, rising through the walls, brushing the air with a weight that was not threatening, but undeniably real. The spark's glow brightened by a fraction. Recognition, hope, relief. I couldn't translate it. I could only feel the shape of the emotion, a trembling shard of belief, as fragile as a candle flame in a storm. Then the hum grew stronger. The sky dimmed, not with darkness, but with distortion, as though something vast were shifting behind the veil of reality, stirring the fabric of the warp without tearing it. Jalen stared upward. "That's not the ancient one." "No," I said, "it's the other." And as the hum deepened, rippling across the world in soft, measured waves, I realized something that chilled me deeper than any fear we had faced so far. This new presence wasn't arriving. It was awakening. Here, on Vardos Hesh. And whatever it was, the spark trusted it, which meant it wasn't coming for us. It was coming for the spark, to protect it or claim it. The ground trembled again, soft, rhythmic, deliberate. And from the far horizon, across the ruins of the manufactories, a distant line of light began to rise, approaching, growing, becoming. At first, none of us understood what we were seeing. The distant line of light, thin as a filament, trembling like a beacon struggling to hold itself steady, seemed too faint to threaten and too focused to ignore. It rose from the far edge of the horizon, where the derelict manufactories slouched like dying titans, their spires hunched beneath the weight of ash and ruin. The beam shimmered with a pale radiance distinct from the newborn spark's golden flicker. This new light was cooler, softer, almost serene. It didn't pulse like a heartbeat. It glowed like memory. And as it drifted higher, spreading across the horizon in slow, deliberate waves, I felt the spark in my hands respond, not with fear, not with dread, but with a trembling warmth that pressed gently against my palms. It knew this presence, or it hoped it did. Sarah approached, her eyes wide with a fragile, fragile awe. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Is that the Emperor's light?" Halbrecht spat blood in the dust, shaking in fury. "The Emperor would never manifest in the warp like this. Blasphemers, all of you. You blind yourselves with false radiance." But no one looked at him. Every gaze turned outward toward that rising glow. Even the Scitarii, bound by code and command, tracked the horizon with glitching optics, their auspex arrays crackling faintly as they attempted, and failed, to categorize what was stirring. The light expanded, not bursting outward, not blazing like a star, but unfolding, layer upon layer, like petals of soft illumination unfurling in a rhythm too patient, too measured, too ancient to belong to anything newly born. Each ripple brushed across the sky in silence, leaving behind a faint shimmer that clung to the clouds like dew. For a moment, the ruins of Vardos Hesh were bathed in a faint silver glow that made even the jagged skeletons of manufactories seem less like wounds and more like monuments carved into twilight. But beneath the beauty, something deeper pulsed. A presence. Old. Not in the way the ancient predator had been old. Not hungry, or vengeful, or cold. This age felt different. It was the age of a long-forgotten hymn. A whisper from a lineage of thought older than any creed we recited. A memory of something the Imperium itself had buried, simply because it could not name it. Jalen swallowed. "I feel it. Throne. I can feel it." Sarah pressed a hand to her heart. "It's so calm." I understood what she meant. The presence didn't demand, didn't probe, didn't crush, or examine, or pry. It simply existed and allowed us to feel that existence, the way one might feel warmth through glass. Yet something about its calm stirred unease in me, Not fear, not suspicion, recognition. As if I had stood beneath a sky like this once before. A lifetime I couldn't remember. In a dream I hadn't yet dreamed. The spark in my hands pulsed again, weakly but eagerly. Its light stretched a fraction toward the distant radiance, as though trying to bridge the distance with its trembling glow. Not alone, not hurt, find. The emotions flowed through me in a frail stream, scattered but clear enough that I knew the meaning. The spark believed this presence might protect it, might understand it, might be kin. I wasn't sure whether that brought me hope or dread. As the distant glow continued to unfold, Halbrecht found his voice again. "Soldiers, listen to me!" He roared through cracked lips. "Whatever that thing is, whatever it pretends to be, it is not salvation. It is another abomination of the warp. You must..." His command ended abruptly. The ground beneath him trembled, not violently, but firmly, like a warning. A ripple of silver light passed through the courtyard, sweeping dust aside and humming through discarded weapons, armor plates, and the shattered tech priest's remains. Halbrecht's restraints sparked and tightened, holding him in place with renewed force. Sarah gasped, stepping back from the shockwave. "It's interacting with us." "No," Jalen whispered. "It's interacting with him. It doesn't want him to interfere." Another ripple of light expanded from the horizon, closer now, brighter, carrying with it a resonance that made my teeth vibrate. This pulse wasn't calm. It was intent, purposeful, moving in exact response to something it had sensed, and that purpose carried weight. These presences, the newborn spark, the ancient predator that hunted it, and this newly awakened force, they all belonged to a conflict far beyond our comprehension. And we, impossibly, stood in the center of it. The spark trembled in my hands, its glow answering the silver radiance with a flicker so faint it nearly disappeared. I clutched it gently, trying to shield it with my body. But the silver glow only brightened. Closer, closer, as though whatever stirred on the horizon had finally found its coordinates, finally fixed its attention on us, on the spark. The next pulse of light rolled outward like a wave of breath, and the horizon itself began to move. At first, I thought the horizon's motion was a trick of the light, an illusion woven by exhaustion and warp-born dread. But as the silver glow intensified, the manufactorum ruins in the distance seemed to stretch, bow, and recede, as though the landscape itself warping in response. It wasn't the world that moved, it was the veil behind it. The air shimmered, the sky bent. Reality quivered like a curtain stirred by a rising wind. And through that trembling distortion, something vast and silver began to take form. Not a creature, not a god, not a demon. Nothing so crude or definitive. It appeared as shifting geometry, shards of luminous outline intersecting and reforming in patterns too graceful to be mechanical, too symmetrical to be organic, too deliberate to be accidental. It was like watching the first strokes of an artist painting existence itself onto the fabric of the horizon. Lines of light carved themselves through the haze, curves unfurled, spiraling in quiet grace. A lattice of illumination formed and dissolved in the same breath. Sarah clutched Jalen's arm, her voice a trembling whisper. What is it?" "I don't know," he breathed. "But it's not hostile." Halbrecht snarled against his restraints, his fury rising to meet the unknown. "Fools! Anything born of the warp is poison. That form, it is camouflage, a trap. Purge it." The ground rippled beneath him again, shutting him up instantly. This time, the ripple felt like a warning, or a command. The geometry grew clearer. The silver constructs merged into something almost humanoid. Tall, fluid, immaculate. Not flesh, not metal, not illusion. It was like light given structure, mind given shape. Radiance poured from its outline in soft waves, illuminating the manufactories in mournful brilliance. But its face, if it had one, remained unfinished, flickering between shapes that dissolved before the eye could fully comprehend them. The spark in my hands flared weakly as it sensed the silver figure forming. A tide of emotion flooded through me. Relief, fear, hope, confusion, all tangled together like a child running toward an embrace and flinching halfway there. Not the same, but known. Known. The spark wasn't certain, but something in it recognized a familiar echo. Something shared, yet alien, comforting, yet intimidating. It trembled in my grip, flickering uncertainly. "Easy," I whispered, voice barely audible. "I don't think it's here to hurt you." But the spark's fear did not fade. The silver figure stepped closer, if step could describe the way its form glided across reality. It crossed the distance like a reflection crossing water, its movement bending the air around it in gentle ripples. The warp didn't scream at its passage. The world didn't buckle. Instead, everything seemed to breathe easier when it approached, like a long-held tension, easing one agonized muscle at a time. For a moment, it felt like standing beneath a quiet dawn. But beneath that calm, something deeper pulsed. Something immense. Something aware. The silver presence radiated no malice, but it radiated power. Not the devouring force of chaos, not the dogmatic weight of the Astronomicon, but a patient, contemplative strength that pressed against my mind like an old teacher examining a pupil. Jalen stepped slightly in front of me. "You don't think it's part of the Emperor, do you?" Sarah shook her head slowly, tears glimmering in her eyes. "The Emperor doesn't feel like this. He burns. He blazes. He wounds even when he protects. This is gentler, older, older." That word echoed inside me. Halbrecht bellowed again, ignored by everyone. "Kill it. Kill them both. Purify this ground before it's too late." The silver presence halted, turned, and for the first time, it looked directly at Halbrecht. He went silent, completely silent. Terror etched itself into his features, turning the color of his face to ash. His eyes dilated, his mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Because he wasn't seeing what we were. He was seeing something else, something the silver presence had chosen to show him. And whatever he saw shattered him. His knees gave out. He crumpled forward, restraints clattering as he collapsed into the dust. The silver presence turned away, unconcerned. My breath trembled. What did it do to him?" Sarah whispered. "It showed him truth," Jalen said quietly, "or something he couldn't accept." The silver presence stepped closer, soft, measured, inexorable. Its radiance washed over us like moonlight, and the spark in my hands responded, trembling violently. The silver figure raised one luminous hand, a gesture of recognition, a gesture of claiming, a gesture of warning. I couldn't tell, but the spark pulsed once, and for the first time it formed a clear thought. Not like me, not safe, not enemy, but not safe. The silver presence lowered its hand, studying, waiting, and then the sky trembled again. Not from the ancient presence, not from the silver one, from somewhere else. A fourth force stirred, One the spark did not recognize. One the silver figure did not expect. One that did not wait for permission to enter the world. Reality buckled. The air tore open, and something began pushing through. The tear in the air didn't resemble the elegant unfolding of the silver presence, nor the brutal intrusion of the ancient predator. It was abrupt, violent in its abruptness, as if something in the warp had been snapped awake by accident rather than intent. The rupture spread like a crack across glass, sharp-edged and shrieking silently through the courtyard, forcing every soldier to clutch their skulls as their thoughts vibrated out of rhythm. Even the silver presence reacted. It stepped back, its perfect composure faltering for a flicker, its geometry distorting as though whatever entered had brushed against its form with unwelcome fingers. Its radiance dimmed in a single pulse, reacting with the tension of a blade suddenly remembering it could break. The spark in my hand spasmed violently. Light scattered from it like shards cast from a shattered lantern. Terror surged through it, raw, immediate, primal. This wasn't curiosity, like the silver presence. This wasn't cold interest, like the ancient hunter. And it wasn't awakening, like the third ripple. This new force came with no emotion at all. No anger, no curiosity, no hunger, just motion. A violent existence unconcerned with what it moved through or tore aside. Sarah staggered backward, nearly falling. What is happening now? How can there be more? How many things are out there? Jalen pulled her behind him, his eyes fixed on the widening tier. Warp storms don't open by coincidence. Something's drawing them. Something's calling them. His gaze flicked toward the trembling spark in my hands, and we all knew. The spark didn't call them. The spark woke them, one by one. First, the ancient predator, then the silver sentinel, now this. The air near the tear began to churn violently, twisting debris into a spiral that scraped against the courtyard like claws against stone. The light around the rupture flickered in sickly distortions. Greens, purples, blacks that were not colors, but absences, voids pretending to be hue. But no demon emerged, no monstrous shape, no warped creature. The entity stepping through wasn't a creature at all. It was a wave of distortion that walked like a shadow escaping from a dead sun. It had no fixed shape. Moments where it resembled a humanoid silhouette melted instantly into streaks of motion, then into static ripples, then into nothing but the pressure of being observed by something that did not bother using eyes. It was a phenomenon, pretending to be a being. And as it approached, everything it passed through flickered out of existence for a heartbeat. Stone, air, sound. Like reality blinked. The silver presence moved first. With a gesture that collapsed 6 shimmering planes of its own body into a spear of brilliant geometry, it struck. A beam of silver cut through the courtyard, humming with precision, slicing through the distortion wave with the intent of cutting through the concept of its existence. The wave did not resist. It simply moved. The spear of light passed through its body as though striking a reflection in water, displacing it without slowing it. The silver presence staggered, its geometry rippling violently, as though surprised for the first time since awakening. Jalen whispered hoarsely, "It ignored it. It ignored that." The distortion turned, or seemed to, and I felt its attention brush past me like a cold vacuum pulling heat from my bones. It didn't recognize me. It didn't care about me. It cared only about the spark, whose glow spasmed in my hands. Not hurt. Not hurt. The spark's emotions fluttered in panic, trying to shape meaning beyond its fear. But this new presence didn't hear. It didn't perceive emotion. It perceived disturbance. And the spark was a disturbance in the warp. A tiny fracture. A newborn anomaly. The wave moved closer. The silver presence stepped protectively between it and us, its form swelling with radiant force. Its geometry sharpened, its light intensified. The air sang with psychic tension as it prepared to strike again. But this time, the wave answered. A ripple burst outward, soundless, invisible, yet strong enough to hurl the silver presence backward. Its radiant form cracked, its left geometric plane splintering into shards that dissolved before they hit the ground. The sentinel staggered, its radiance flickering like a star caught in a collapsing field. It wasn't defeated, but it had been wounded, and it hadn't been expecting to be. The wave drifted forward, undisturbed, unemotional, unstoppable. The spark convulsed in my hands, light flaring violently, trying to hide in the only place it knew. Me. A wordless plea ripped through my thoughts. Help. Hide. Please. The wave lifted a limb, not an arm, not a hand, but something that chose to be arm-like. Reality around it bent inward. I realized what it was doing an instant before it completed the motion. It was erasing the spark, not killing. Erasing, undoing. The silver presence lunged, too slow. Jalen screamed my name, too far. Sarah fell to her knees, too late. The wave's arm descended toward the spark, and a voice cut through the courtyard. Not a sound, a will. A single psychic command that cracked through reality like a thunderclap. Enough! The wave froze. The silver presence trembled, then knelt. The spark in my hands flared bright enough to blind me. And overhead, the sky opened, not with a tear, not with a crack, with light. A fifth presence arrived, one the spark recognized. One the silver sentinel obeyed, one that even the distortion wave hesitated before. And I realized, with a breath that shook me to my core, this wasn't a new force answering the spark. This was the force the spark had been born from. The light that poured from the torn sky wasn't harsh like the Astronomican's distant blaze, nor searing like the echoes of demonic presence. It came instead as a slow, solemn radiance, steady, deliberate, ancient, not in age, but in gravity. It spread across the courtyard with the weight of a vow remembered after millennia of silence. Buildings cracked in its glow. Shadows dissolved cleanly, not burned away, but unmade by something too exacting for darkness to cling to. The distortion wave, moments earlier, advancing with the cold inevitability of a collapsing star, froze mid-fold. Its form quivered in a way that wasn't fear or pain, but submission, like a note being held in place by an unseen conductor. And the silver sentinel lowered itself further, half kneeling, geometric body bending in reverence. Only the spark moved. Its glow surged with a brilliance I had never sensed from it. Still fragile, still trembling, but alive in a way that made my chest ache. It rose from my hands in an unsteady drift, drawn upward like a wounded child recognizing a guardian's voice. Not alone, not alone, not anymore. The emotions flooded me with such clarity I nearly fell back. My breath broke into a gasp. For a trembling heartbeat, the spark pressed against my palm in farewell. Not to leave, not to ascend, but to steady itself before the moment that awaited it. Then it lifted. The light in the sky curled downward as though reaching, and the spark reached back. Their radiances brushed. A brief contact, tender and seismic at once, and the warp itself seemed to exhale. The new presence solidified, not into a creature, not into a god, into an idea with boundaries, a shape composed of layered illumination, vast yet gentle, resolving into a silhouette that dwarfed the sentinel and held the distortion wave at a distance with its mere arrival. Its form appeared blurred at the edges, as though reality needed time to understand what stood upon it. But its core was unmistakable. A calm so deep it felt like the space between heartbeats. A strength so patient it didn't need to announce itself. A presence that had no desire to dominate, harm, or consume. Awake, aware, and connected to the spark as a parent might be connected to a child, by resonance, not blood. My knees gave out. I fell into the dust, overwhelmed by the weight of what stood before us. Jalen dropped beside me, eyes wide, mouth open in awe. Sarah sobbed, not from terror, but from the sheer impossible beauty of it. Halbrecht, pale as a corpse, whispered one broken phrase again and again, as if repeating it might shield him from a reality too large to survive. No, 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 no. This cannot be. This cannot be. But it was. The shimmering figure, vast and composed of layered radiance, lowered itself toward the spark, who shivered in midair like a child reaching for an embrace with trembling arms. The newborn's light cracked in places, fragmented by trauma and fear. But when the larger presence extended a single filament of illumination, the spark steadied. A pulse passed between them, warm, reassuring, complete. The silver sentinel bowed its head, though its fractured geometry flickered with strain. It had fought to protect the spark, but it had not been made for that task. It had been a watcher, not a guardian. The distortion wave twitched, its form shuddering as if yearning to resume its path. But the towering presence shifted slightly, and the wave recoiled, folding into itself with distorted compliance. Throne. What is it? Jalen whispered. Is it a god? His voice was barely audible under the hum filling the air, a hum that vibrated through my bones, through the dust, through the silent manufactories. But the more I felt it, the more certain I became. It wasn't a god. Not yet. It wasn't born from worship, nor hatred, nor emotion made manifest. It was older than a newborn spark, and younger than the forces that hunted it. If the spark was a breath, then this was a sigh. If the spark was a heartbeat, then this was the pulse of something awakening to the fact that it had a heart. The towering radiance turned toward me, not hostile, not claiming, acknowledging. A filament of light brushed the ground before me, as if inviting, not ordering, me to stand. My legs shook as I rose, dust cascading from my armor. I felt every eye in the courtyard on me, every breath held, every trembling soul waiting to see if the light would strike me down or lift me up. Instead, the presence extended a single tendril toward my chest. It did not touch me. It simply hovered, waiting. A question formed in the space between us. Not a thought, not a word, but a meaning built from resonance and intention. Why did you protect it? I didn't answer aloud. I didn't need to. My thoughts, broken, fearful, painfully human, rose in response. Because it was small, because it was alone, because no one should die afraid. The massive presence shuddered once, not in anger, not in confusion, in understanding. A warmth flowed outward, washing over the courtyard, calming the distortions in the air, softening the geometric fractures in the sentinel's form, holding the distortion wave in place like a stern hand holding back a tide. And then The light dimmed, not retreating, not fading, preparing. The spark rose higher, trembling in anticipation. The sentinel bowed deeper. The distortion wave coiled like a storm waiting to be commanded. And overhead, the sky began to fold again. Not tearing, opening. For something the towering presence intended to reveal. Something that would change everything we thought we understood. Something that would decide whether the spark remained a flicker or ignited into something far greater. The sky did not tear this time. It did not scream or fracture or bleed impossible colors. Instead, it unfolded, quietly, deliberately, like a veil being drawn aside by unseen hands. The radiance from the towering presence pulsed in gentle waves, guiding the heavens to open without violence. Every ripple of light carried intention, a choice measured with the care of something that understood how easily reality broke when power acted without thought. For the first time since this nightmare began, the warp felt still. Not safe, not benign, but still, like a storm holding its breath. The spark hovered at the center of the courtyard, trembling in the soft gravity of the presence above. Its tiny glow pulsed faintly, each flicker a question it didn't yet know how to ask. It rotated slowly, unsteady, as if trying to orient itself toward a truth hovering just beyond its perception. Jalen stood beside me, breathless. "It's guiding it," he murmured. "But guiding it toward what? Toward becoming something? Toward understanding?" Sarah stepped forward, clutching her Aquila pendant. She didn't speak at first. Her lips formed shapes of silent prayer, but I knew she wasn't praying to the Emperor. Not here. Not now. She was praying that whatever this presence intended would not destroy us in the process. Halbrecht, still kneeling where the sentinel had reduced him with a single glance, trembled like a man trapped inside a nightmare he refused to admit was real. His voice cracked as he whispered, "If this is the birth of a god, then the galaxy will burn." But the towering radiance did not respond. It didn't need to. Its attention rested wholly on the spark, on the fragile, trembling ember of existence that hovered like a candle untouched by wind. The spark pulsed again, stronger this time. A thought brushed my mind, faint as a breath. Fear. Why fear? Uncertainty. Why uncertain? Because it sensed a threshold, a decision, a point beyond which there would be no return. The towering presence extended a lattice of gentle illumination, curling slowly toward the spark, not to seize it, not to force it, but to show it something. The sky's opening shifted. Beyond the radiance, I saw it. The warp, not as a churning sea of madness, but as an expanse of vast, trembling potential. Rivers of thought that had never been shaped. Tides of forgotten dreams. The distant outlines of entities that slumbered beneath the surface of reality like continents beneath an ocean. The warp was no less dangerous, no less chaotic. But in that moment, through the towering presence's sight, it felt open, as though it waited for the spark to choose whether to step into its currents or extinguish itself in silence. A quiet hum drifted across the courtyard. The sentinel bowed its head as the radiance from the sky deepened in invitation. Even the distortion wave seemed to recoil, not defeated, not destroyed, but held immobile by a will too vast to defy. The spark turned toward me, not in motion, its form too frail for such an action, but in meaning. A trembling thread of emotion brushed my thoughts, seeking reassurance it had no words to ask for. I swallowed hard. Because the truth struck me with cruel honesty, it wasn't merely choosing to exist. It was choosing whether to become something that would change the warp forever. Something neither chaos-born nor emperor-forged. A god not born of hatred or fear, but from the instinctive, fragile courage of a dying world refusing to let a new life be extinguished. "Is it asking your permission?" Jalen whispered, his voice trembling. I didn't answer, because the spark trembled again, reaching, needing, not command, not worship, understanding. It wanted to know why I had fought for it, why anyone would. And as I stared at it, the warped sky above swirling with the promise of something impossible, the words rose unbidden in my mind. Not spoken, not thought, but felt. Because you are small. Because you asked for help. Because anything born innocent deserves a chance to live. The spark's glow steadied. For the first time, a single, unwavering pulse. The towering presence responded, light cascading in ripples of acknowledgement, of readiness, of waiting. The rupture in the sky widened, the warp stirred, and the spark drifted upward, toward the threshold between being nothing and becoming something the galaxy was not prepared for. The spark rose slowly, almost timidly, as though the very act of lifting itself closer to the rift might break it. Its glow flickered against the swirling sky, the trembling silhouette of its light dwarfed by the vast radiance that waited above. Each pulse it released felt steadier than the last. Fragile, yes, but with a new undertone of resolve that had not been there before. It was choosing. Not because it understood the consequences, not because it had been told, but because something in it sensed that existing meant reaching, even if reaching meant facing something far larger than itself. The towering presence stirred. Its layered radiance flowed in soft cascades, folding and unfolding around the spark like a protective shell, not enclosing it, not imprisoning it, simply standing as witness to the moment, a guardian of possibility. The sentinel watched from below, still kneeling, still flickering with geometric fractures. Its bowed posture was not submission, I realized. It was reverence, awe, recognition of something newborn stepping toward a threshold the sentinel itself was never meant to cross. The distortion wave remained frozen, held by the towering presence's authority. Its form pulsed faintly, a warning echo of the cruelty and inevitability that lurked in the warp's depths. Forces that would erase anything unclaimed, unshielded, undefined. The spark climbed higher. Jalen whispered beside me, "If it goes through, what happens to us? To this world?" "I don't know," I said softly. "Maybe nothing. Maybe everything." Behind us, Sarah cried without sound, tears streaming down her face, not from terror, but from the unbearable tenderness of watching something so small confront a fate so immense. Halbrecht's broken voice rasped behind his restraints. "If it becomes a god, the Imperium will fall. We will never control it, never contain it." But even he didn't sound certain anymore. Because this wasn't chaos. It wasn't the Emperor. It wasn't anything the Imperium's dogma had language for. This was something the galaxy had no catechism to describe. Something born not of destruction, but of being seen. The spark drifted closer to the threshold, where the veil rippled in soft motions, gentle gradients of light and darkness bending around its glow. Beyond it, the warp shifted like an ocean stirred by moonlight, currents opening into vistas I had no words for. This was the warp without war, without teeth, without frenzy, not safe, never safe, but open. The towering presence extended a single filament toward the spark, not touching it, but guiding it. offering direction while letting the choice remain wholly its own. The spark pulsed again. A single soft emotion brushed my mind. Thank. Not gratitude for saving it. Gratitude for letting it choose. The towering presence brightened. The courtyard fell silent. Even the wind seemed to kneel. The spark rose the final inches, then stopped. Just inches below the threshold, its light shuddered in confusion. Not fear, not refusal, confusion. I felt it immediately, because as it hovered there, something else stirred in the warp, something far beyond our sight. A tremor, faint but unmistakable, rippled through the currents. Not hostile, not predatory. A presence. Not one of the 5 we had encountered. Another, distant, silent, watching, and the spark felt it. It pulsed again, weaker now, almost trembling. The towering presence sensed the hesitation. It shifted closer, not pushing, not pulling, but offering its radiance like a lantern in fog, hoping to steady the spark's fear. But the spark could not be steadied. It was overwhelmed, not by the enormity of becoming something new, but by the truth the warp whispered in faint echoes beneath it. If it crossed the threshold, if it chose this moment to ignite, it might not ignite alone. Something else might ignite with it. Something older, something waiting, something the towering presence had not expected, something even it feared. The spark recoiled slightly, trembling violently, light fracturing like a heartbeat under strain. Jalen grabbed my arm. "What's wrong with it?" Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth. "It's afraid." "No," I whispered. "It's deciding." The towering presence lowered its vast silhouette, radiance dimming as if to ease the spark's burden. It offered the spark its calm, its stillness, its patience, and then a tremor shuddered across the warp. A deep, resonant tremor, like a breath drawn by something waking far beneath the surface. Something that recognized the spark not as a child, but as a rival. The spark flared. The towering presence braced. The sentinel froze in reverence and alarm. The distortion wave convulsed, struggling against its bindings. And overhead, the threshold flickered. Because another presence was rising. Not ancient like the hunter. Not serene like the guardian. Not formless like the wave. Not newborn like the spark. But something in between. Something with intention. Something that had been waiting for the spark to choose. And now, sensing its hesitation, it reached. Not gently, not violently, but with inevitability. The spark screamed, its light fracturing. And I understood. Something else wanted to be born, and it didn't want to be born alone. The spark's scream wasn't sound. It was a convulsion of light and emotion so violent that it punched straight through thought. I doubled over, palms pressed to the stone, vision erupting into a storm of fractured colors as the newborn presence rippled in panic. Its glow twisted, flaring and dimming in rapid, terrified bursts. The sky above responded instantly. The open veil shuddered, light bending inward like an aperture snapping halfway shut. The towering presence reacted immediately. Its vast silhouette expanded, radiance intensifying as if trying to shield the spark, folding its layered illumination around the trembling ember. The sentinel rose from its reverent kneel, geometric planes reforming with sharp urgency. The distortion wave, still held in place by the guardian's will, thrashed against its invisible bonds, glitching through shapes that made my eyes ache to perceive. And then the new presence reclaimed the warp, not gently, not quietly, It rose from depths too deep to see, too deep even for the Guardian's illumination to pierce. A gravitational emotion surged through the air, thick enough to taste, metallic and electric, like breathing in the ionized atmosphere before a lightning strike. Every hair on my skin lifted. The ground vibrated. The air hummed like a living wire. Jalen stumbled, gripping my shoulder, his voice shaking. "There's another one. Emperor, help us. How many are there?" But I knew the truth, even if I didn't know how to say it. There weren't many. There were only the ones that noticed, and the spark had been seen. A shadow moved across the warp beyond the veil. Not darkness, but a distortion, like a shape outlined by the absence of light. It didn't possess the cold cruelty of the ancient hunter, nor the serene geometry of the Guardian. It felt focused, purposeful, gathering toward coherence with terrifying speed. It wasn't older than the Guardian. It wasn't younger than the spark. It was becoming. Becoming because the spark was becoming. Sarah choked out a terrified gasp. "It's mirroring it. By the throne. It's trying to form with it. Not join, not destroy. Co-birth." The spark sensed it too. Its glow spasmed, scattering into panicked ribbons of light that cracked the air itself. Its emotions hammered through my mind in frantic pulses. Fear, refusal, confusion, an overwhelming plea. Not want, not want, not want. The Guardian surged forward, pulling the spark back from the threshold with a motion that sent ripples of light crashing through the veil. The Sentinel followed, unfolding into its full geometric brilliance, placing itself as a buffer between the spark and the emerging presence. The warp trembled like an ocean lifting around a rising island. The new presence pushed upward, breaking through the veil's surface. A swirling shape coalesced, a vortex of luminous dark, each rotation sharpening into something too focused to be chaos and too fluid to be matter. Tendrils of shadow light reached outward, not hunting, not searching, but anchoring themselves into existence. It was trying to be born exactly where the spark was trying to choose. Jalen whispered, "It can't let it exist alone." "No," I murmured. "It isn't that it can't." The truth struck like a blade. It won't. The spark shrieked in my thoughts, a desperate breaking sound, and fled downward, pressing its tiny body of light against my chest, trying to crawl inside, trying to hide inside the only place it trusted. It sank into my armor, its glow pushing against my ribs like a heartbeat terrified of being smothered. The Guardian reeled as the spark retreated, its radiance faltering for the first time. It reached out toward me, not touching, but pleading, urging, warning that my closeness to the newborn was becoming a conduit between two becoming forces. The Sentinel shifted, geometric limbs unfolding like blades, preparing to intercept the emerging presence. But the new presence reacted instantly, accelerating its coherence. Shadow light spiraled, tightening into a half-born silhouette that felt too sharp, too hungry for purpose, too intent on locking its existence to the sparks. The Guardian braced, the Sentinel armed. The distortion wave convulsed, the sky roared, and then the newborn spark inside me pulsed, not in fear, in pain. Its voice burned through my skull. Stop, stop, stop. It couldn't flee, it couldn't become, not with something else becoming with it. And for a heartbeat, a single, breathless heartbeat, I felt the spark's desire not to choose a path, but to choose silence, to extinguish itself, to end the conflict. The Guardian radiated shock, The sentinel flared in alarm. The new presence lunged, and I acted without thinking. I stepped between the spark and the rising presence, not because I understood, not because I believed, because it begged, and there was no one else who could move fast enough. The two presences collided across the veil, the Guardian's radiance clashing with the rising shadow light in an eruption of blinding energy. The world split into brilliance. White swallowed the world. Total, absolute, annihilating white. No shape, no breath, no sound. It wasn't blindness. Blindness has darkness. This was the erasure of perception itself, as if the universe had been scraped clean so a new truth could be written over it. My body vanished into the brilliance. My thoughts unraveled. Even the spark's trembling presence went silent, a faint ember buried within a storm of unmaking. Then slowly, impossibly, the whiteness thinned, not returning to darkness, not returning to light, returning to awareness. My senses flooded back all at once, crashing over me like a tide. The world reassembled itself in fragments. Sound first, distant and warped like underwater echoes. Then smell, scorched stone and ionized air. Then gravity, pulling me down into the broken courtyard. My knees struck the ground. My palms slid through warm dust. For a heartbeat, I thought I had survived alone, until I heard the screaming. It wasn't human. It wasn't the spark. It wasn't even the rising presence. It was the warp itself. The veil above the courtyard was splitting, not in the ragged tears of demonic incursion, but in luminous fractures like shattered crystal, struggling to decide whether to bleed light or shadow. The two presences, guardian and becoming rival, clashed across that fracture in violent pulses. Each collision rippling across reality like a drumbeat too heavy for the world to bear. I staggered to my feet. Jalen crawled toward me, coughing blood. Sarah knelt with her arms around her head, tears streaming down her face from psychic pressure alone. Halbrecht lay unmoving, eyes open in blank terror, staring at something only he could see. But the battlefield that mattered was above us. The Guardian's radiance surged upward, striking the rising presence with a force that shook the manufactories to their foundations. Its layered illumination unfurled into vast shields of light, attempting to block, contain, suppress. For a moment it succeeded, pushing the shadow light presence back into the depths of the warp. But the rival surged again, faster, stronger, more formed. It was learning. It was adapting. It was becoming with a violence the spark never possessed, and that made it terrifying. Its tendrils of shadow light struck the Guardian's radiance, piercing through fractal shields, driving into the sky with a malicious grace. Each impact sent a shockwave through the courtyard, rattling my bones. I fell to one knee, gasping. The sentinel beside the Guardian flickered, its geometry fracturing at the edges like a mirror cracking under stress. It tried to assist, interposing itself, reshaping its limbs into stabilizing patterns. But the rival presence was too fluid, too volatile, slipping between structures as if shape itself meant nothing to it. A fresh scream tore through my mind, the spark. It had retreated into me earlier, seeking safety, but now it pulsed wildly against my ribs, trying to push outward, trying to break free, trying to intervene. Terror and sorrow flooded through me, a plea woven from instinct and emotion. Not want hurt, not want fight, not want born with wrong. I clutched my chest. No, stay, just wait. But the spark didn't understand restraint. It understood only that the Guardian was failing. Above us, the shadow light presence surged forward, wrapping itself around the Guardian's radiance in a spiral of impossible geometry. The Guardian strained, its layers bending inward in a collapse of light, but it held barely, its brilliance flickering like a beacon battered by a hurricane. A thought, the spark's thought, stabbed into my mind with painful clarity. Help. I stared upward, trembling. I can't help them. But it pushed harder. Help? Because it saw something I didn't. It saw the connection, the thread, the conduit the Guardian had unintentionally formed when it reached for me earlier. I wasn't just a bystander. I was a hinge. The spark's retreat into me had turned me into a fulcrum between forces far beyond my comprehension. If I acted, it could change the balance. If I failed, I could end all of us. A deafening shockwave nearly knocked me off my feet. The silver sentinel screamed in broken harmonic tones as one of its geometric planes shattered entirely, dissolving into scattered shards of light. The Guardian staggered backward, forced down toward the courtyard. Its radiance dimmed, spilling across the ground like liquid moonlight. The shadow light presence descended after it, a spear of becoming ripping through the veil. And the spark inside me panicked. It erupted outward. A surge of gold tore from my chest, a molten plume of emotion and light that seared the air with its desperation. It shot upward, slamming into the descending rival presence with a force that cracked the sky into concentric rings of distortion. The explosion of psychic energy threw me backward, flinging me across the courtyard. Jalen caught me by instinct alone, both of us tumbling into rubble. When I opened my eyes, gasping, the sight above froze my breath entirely. The spark was no longer a trembling ember. It had expanded into a luminous sphere of fractured gold, spinning so rapidly it distorted the air around it. And the shadow light presence was no longer forming from the warp. It was forming around the spark. A twin, a mirror, a rival being pulled into existence by the spark's emergence. Two births entangled, two gods unborn, and the Guardian. The Guardian seemed suddenly, impossibly small. The spark flared, the rival flared, and I understood with a horror that hollowed my bones. The warp was not birthing a god. It was birthing a conflict, a war of becoming. And I, somehow, impossibly, was the point both forces were beginning to anchor themselves to. The spark screamed, the rival roared, the Guardian collapsed, and the sky ruptured, preparing to unleash something the galaxy was not meant to survive. The sky tore itself apart, not in the howling violence of a warp rift, nor in the sanctified blaze of the Astronomicon, but in the clash of two newborn forces ripping their first breaths into the fabric of existence. Gold and shadow light spiraled upward in a collision of becoming, wrapping around each other like two storms fighting for dominion over the same horizon. Every pulse radiating from them twisted the world, stone bending like softened metal, matter trembling at the edge of dissolution, time quivering like a wounded animal. The Guardian struggled beneath the storm, its layered radiance flickering erratically. Even a presence that grand, that steady, could not withstand the birth of two simultaneous wills fighting to define themselves. The sentinel screamed silently, collapsing into fractured geometry that dissolved into silver dust. The distortion wave shrank to a trembling coil, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what it had nearly erased. And at the center of it all, the spark spun in agony. Not from malice, not from weakness, from the unbearable pull of the rival presence forming around it, feeding on its attempt to exist, shaping itself from the spark's every instinct like a shadow taught to stand upright by the light that cast it. 2 becoming. 1 moment. No choice left between them. The air folded violently as the rival's half-formed silhouette lunged toward the spark, wrapping around it like a vortex of consuming intent. The spark responded with a scream that shook the courtyard to dust, golden light erupting outward and pushing the shadow back, but never fully, never permanently. It recoiled, only to strike again, each surge more defined, more coordinated, more intent on molding itself into whatever the spark was not. Jalen shouted something behind me, words I couldn't hear through the psychic hurricane. Sarah clung to a broken wall, eyes streaming tears of light, mumbling prayers she no longer believed in but needed to speak. Halbrecht stared upward in mute paralysis, a commissar's mind unraveling in the face of a birth no ideology had prepared him for. And I stood, broken, exhausted, barely able to breathe. But the spark saw me, even through the pain, even through the rival's assault, even as it fractured under the weight of becoming something it did not understand. Its voice slammed into my mind. Help, help, help. Not command, not dependence. A plea from something that had never known anything but reaching. I staggered forward, 1 step, then another, toward the center of the psychic storm. The moment I crossed into its radius, my vision shattered into gold and shadow, my bones humming, my heartbeat syncing with the spark's fractured pulses. The rival presence noticed. It turned toward me, not as an enemy, not as a destroyer, as something curious. Something that sensed what the spark saw in me. A fulcrum, a mirror, a witness. Its shadow light spiraled down, coiling around me, brushing my skin with cold intent. It wasn't trying to kill me. It wasn't trying to corrupt me. It was trying to anchor itself, to bond to the same place the spark had bonded, to claim the same foothold into reality. The spark responded instantly. A beam of gold tore from its orbit, slamming between me and the rival with the force of a starburst. Emotion flooded through me. Fear, protectiveness, longing, sorrow. But above all, one truth. It didn't want the rival to be born through me. It wanted to protect me, even as it died, even as it fought for a future it didn't understand, even as the galaxy spiraled around its first impossible breaths. The Guardian surged upward, its diminished radiance expanding in a desperate attempt to separate the 2 newborns. But the rival crushed half its light in an instant, shadow ripping through the Guardian's projection like a knife through water. The rival spun, gathering shape. The spark pulsed, fracturing. 2 creations, no reconciliation, no coexistence, only collision, only outcome, only choice. My voice broke free, raw, torn from the bottom of my lungs. Stop! The sky froze. For an impossible heartbeat, just one, the warp stilled. The spark turned toward me, its glow trembling. The rival shifted, its shadow collapsing inward. The Guardian hung in silent suspension. And into that sliver of stillness, one truth surged out of me, not spoken in words, not shaped for human ears, but hammered through the warp with every desperate thread of my will. You do not have to become through destruction. You can choose something else. The spark heard. The rival heard. Both trembled. Both hesitated. And the Guardian. The Guardian moved. Its vast radiance folded, wrapped, and spiraled around the spark. Not to seize it, not to shield it, but to link with it. To offer structure, shape, choice without replacing its will. The rival lunged to stop the union, but the spark made its choice first. A pulse erupted from it, bright enough to blind the world. The rival howled, not in pain, but in thwarted becoming, and was ripped backward into the warp, dragged screaming into an unformed fold of unreality, dissolving into pure potential as the veil snapped shut. The Guardian caught the spark, held it, stabilized it. Its fractured glow softened, slowed, steadied, warm as sunrise, fragile as breath, alive. The sky folded closed, the light dimmed, silence fell, and the spark, no longer shaking, no longer hunted, no longer forced, drifted downward, hovering just before me like a candle flame floating in the ruins. A single emotion brushed my mind, not fear, not sadness. Something tender, something small. Thank. The spark pressed against my chest, light passing through me in a single warm pulse, and then rose again, higher, higher, until it reached the Guardian's waiting radiance. The Guardian turned, carrying the spark upward, bearing it into the warp, not as prey, not as child, but as something chosen. The sky sealed, the world exhaled, and the courtyard of Vardos Hesh went still. Jalen collapsed beside me, sobbing in exhausted relief. Sarah dropped to her knees, whispering prayers with a voice that no longer needed them to be heard. Halbrecht stared upward, broken beyond words. And I knelt in the dust, staring at the empty sky, knowing that I had witnessed something the Imperium would never believe. Not a god born, not a god killed, a choice made, a spark saved, a war of becoming ended before it began. And somewhere out there in the silent depths of the warp, carried by a guardian older than any scripture, a newborn presence flickered, small, fragile, but no longer alone, no longer hunted, and perhaps, somewhere far beyond my comprehension, no longer afraid. The end.